They say death has many names across the galaxy. The Zephyrians call it the Final Silence. The Kronak refer to it as the Great Devourer. But there's one name that makes even the most battle-hardened alien warriors pause mid-sentence. Their multiple hearts skipping beats they didn't know they had. The Reaper. For 3 cycles, Marcus Kane had been just another prisoner in cell block Omega-7. Another human curiosity for the Galactic Coalition to study, prod, and eventually dispose of. They thought they knew what humans were capable of. They thought they understood the limits of Terran endurance. They were catastrophically wrong. Because the moment that alien guard whispered his call sign in perfect English, a name that had become legend across 17 star systems, Marcus realized his captivity wasn't random. Someone out there knew exactly who they had caged. And, more terrifyingly, they knew what he was capable of when those chains finally came off. The galaxy was about to remember why humans don't just survive in the darkness between stars. They thrive in it. What happens when the apex predator realizes it's been playing prey? When a most feared soldier in human history discovers his capture was never about imprisonment, but about unleashing something the galaxy isn't ready for. Some cages aren't meant to hold you in. They're meant to keep everything else safe from what you'll become when you break free. The pain had become Marcus Kane's only reliable companion during his 17 months of captivity aboard the Galactic Coalition vessel Dominion's Edge. It arrived punctually each morning with the artificial dawn cycle, a symphony of aching joints and healing wounds that reminded him he was still breathing, still fighting, still refusing to break. He pressed his back against the cold metal wall of his cell, feeling the familiar bite of the restraint collar around his neck. The device hummed with malevolent energy, ready to deliver incapacitating shocks if he moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. His captors had learned quickly that traditional restraints meant little to a human who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of killing in the most creative ways imaginable. The cell itself was a marvel of paranoid engineering. 3 meters by 3 meters of reinforced chromium steel, with walls thick enough to stop a plasma cannon. No windows, no decoration, just harsh white light that never dimmed and air that tasted of recycled fear. They had built it specifically for him after the first week, when he had nearly escaped using nothing but a loose floor panel and the guard's overconfidence. Marcus flexed his fingers, working feeling back into digits that had grown stiff from the neural dampeners they pumped into his food. At 42, he was supposedly past his prime by military standards. The bureaucrats back on Earth would have had him transferred to a training position years ago, if not for his particular skill set. But here, surrounded by beings who measured strength in entirely different ways, age became irrelevant. The Zephyrians who had captured him stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors based on their emotional state. Their leader, Commander HFY, currently displayed deep purples and blacks across his hide, colors Marcus had learned indicated frustration and growing anger. The alien paced outside his cell with the measured steps of a predator deciding when to strike. "Tell me again about the Battle of Kepler's Crossing." HFY's voice carried the strange harmonic quality of his species, like 2 people speaking in perfect unison. Marcus didn't look up from his examination of his fingernails. "I've told you before, I don't discuss operational details with the enemy." "Enemy?" HFY's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Human, your species hasn't even achieved proper interstellar travel. You're barely capable of reaching your own moon consistently. We are so far beyond your understanding that calling us enemies is like an insect declaring war on the weather." That almost made Marcus smile. Almost. If only they knew what humans had really been doing during their supposed technological infancy. If only they understood that being underestimated was humanity's greatest weapon. The Coalition had found Earth purely by accident while mapping a routine trade route. What they discovered was a planet full of what they considered primitive beings who had somehow managed to survive in one of the galaxy's most dangerous sectors. The gravity was crushing by galactic standards, the weather patterns were chaotically violent, and The wildlife was universally hostile. By all rights, nothing intelligent should have evolved there. But humans had done more than evolve. They had thrived in conditions that would have killed most galactic species within days. They had turned their death world into a launching pad for something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that didn't just adapt to harsh conditions, but actively sought them out. Marcus had been part of the first wave of human deep space reconnaissance. Officially, they were research missions designed to study the outer reaches of the solar system. Unofficially, they were preparation for the day when humanity would need to defend itself against threats it couldn't yet imagine. The day had come sooner than anyone expected. Your ship was advanced beyond what our intelligence suggested possible. Vex-High continued, his skin now showing streaks of yellow, curiosity mixed with suspicion. The stealth capabilities alone should have been beyond your species for another 1,000 cycles. Yet you appeared in our space without any of our sensors detecting your approach until you chose to reveal yourself. Marcus finally looked up, meeting the alien's 4 eyes with steady gray ones that had seen too much death to be impressed by threats. Maybe your sensors just aren't as good as you think they are. The casual insult sent waves of deep red across Vex-High's skin. Anger. Good. Angry interrogators made mistakes, and Marcus had been cataloging every mistake for the past 17 months. You will tell me how you achieved such advanced stealth technology, Vex-High said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Or we will continue our experiments on your nervous system until we extract the information directly from your brain. You could try, Marcus said quietly. But we both know how your last attempt at neural extraction went. The silence that followed was heavy with memory. 3 coalition scientists had attempted to probe Marcus's mind using advanced telepathic techniques 6 months ago. The feedback had put 2 of them in medical suspension and driven the 3rd completely insane. Human minds, it turned out, were not built like other species. Where most galactic races had evolved smooth, organized thought patterns, human consciousness was a chaotic storm of survival instincts, predatory cunning, and barely contained aggression. Trying to read a human mind was like trying to drink from a fire hose filled with razor blades. Your species is an aberration, Vex-High said, resuming his pacing. A cosmic mistake that should have been corrected long ago. We should have glassed your planet the moment we found it. Should have, could have, would have, Marcus said, settling back against the wall. But you didn't. Want to know why? Vex-High stopped pacing. Enlighten me, primitive. Because you're scared. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Vex-High's skin cycled through several colors before settling on a mottled pattern Marcus couldn't interpret. Scared? Of what? Your pathetic species barely controls a single star system. That's exactly what scares you, Marcus said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. We barely control one system, yet we build ships that can sneak past your sensors. We barely understand your technology, yet we manage to adapt it in ways you never considered. We're primitive, yet your scientists can't figure out how our minds work. He leaned forward slightly, ignoring the warning buzz from his collar. You're scared because you don't understand what you're looking at. You see a species that should have died out millennia ago, but instead we're here, talking to you as equals. And deep down, in whatever passes for your subconscious, you know that if we can do this much with so little, what are we going to be capable of when we really get started? Vex-High's skin had gone completely black, a color Marcus had never seen before. The alien commander stared at him for a long moment before turning abruptly and walking away without another word. Marcus settled back against the wall and allowed himself a small smile. 17 months of captivity had taught him many things about his captors, but the most important lesson was this. They were used to being the apex predators. They had built their civilization on the assumption that they were inherently superior to any species they might encounter. Meeting humanity had shattered that assumption, and they were still trying to pick up the pieces. But Marcus knew something they didn't. His capture hadn't been random, and his presence here wasn't a stroke of luck for the Coalition. Someone had specifically arranged for him to be taken alive, and that someone had to know exactly who they were dealing with. The question was whether they wanted him as an asset or as a weapon. Given his reputation, it was probably both. Marcus closed his eyes and began his daily mental exercises, running through tactical scenarios and contingency plans. Somewhere out there, the USS Phantom's edge was still in coalition space, still invisible to their sensors, still waiting for orders that might never come. But Marcus hadn't survived 15 years as the Navy's most classified operative by waiting for rescue. He had survived by becoming the kind of nightmare that other nightmares told stories about to frighten their children. They called him the Reaper for a reason. And soon, his captors were going to learn exactly what that reason was. The artificial night cycle began, and Marcus came prepared for another day of playing the perfect prisoner. But deep in his mind, behind walls of mental discipline that had been forged in the fires of countless battles, something patient and deadly continued to wait. The galaxy had wanted to meet humanity's finest warrior. It was about to get its wish. The morning brought a new face to Marcus Kane's cell, and with it, the first genuine surprise he had experienced in months. The being standing beside Commander HFY was unlike any of the coalition species he had encountered during his captivity. Where the Zephyrians were tall and imposing, this creature was compact and serpentine, with scaled skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most disturbing were its eyes, completely black, without iris or pupil, like looking into deep space itself. "This is Interrogator SSS Thek of the Shadow Caste," HFY announced, his skin displaying nervous yellow patterns. "He has experience with difficult subjects." Marcus studied the newcomer with professional interest. The Shadow Caste were legendary, even among human intelligence circles, a secretive order within the coalition that specialized in extracting information from subjects who had proven resistant to conventional methods. Their techniques were rumored to be so effective that they could make anyone talk, regardless of training or mental conditioning. "Commander Kane," Thek spoke, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Not because of the alien's voice, which was surprisingly pleasant, but because of what he had said. His rank, his name. Marcus had been captured in civilian clothes during what was officially a mining survey mission. His identification had listed him as Marcus Walsh, geological specialist. For 17 months, he had maintained that cover identity despite everything they had thrown at him. The fact that this creature knew his real name meant only one thing. Someone had told them. "I see you understand the implications," Thek continued, moving with a fluid grace that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of a hunting snake. "Yes, we know who you are. Marcus Kane, Lieutenant Commander, United Earth Navy Special Operations Division. Serial number 7749, Delta, Tango, Echo. Born in New Chicago, Earth, on standard date June 15th, 2387. Father, Robert Kane, deceased. Mother, Sarah Kane, current status unknown." Each word hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. Somewhere in the galaxy, human intelligence had been compromised. The question was how badly. "We know about the Battle of Kepler's Crossing," SSS Thek said, settling into what looked like a meditation posture beside the cell, where a single human operative eliminated an entire hegemony command post using nothing but improvised explosives and what your people call tactical creativity. "We know about the incident at Proxima Station, where you allegedly convinced 3 separate crime syndicates to destroy each other while you walked away with the intelligence you needed." The alien's head tilted at an impossible angle, studying Marcus with those depthless eyes. "But most interesting of all, we know about Operation Dark Harbor, where you earned a call sign that has become something of a legend in certain circles." Marcus fought to keep his breathing steady. Operation Dark Harbor was classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people in the entire Navy knew the details, and most of them were dead. "Tell me, Commander Kane." SSS Thek's voice carried an almost hypnotic quality now. "When did you first realize that humans were different from other species? When did you understand that you were not just another intelligent race stumbling around in the dark between stars, but something fundamentally other. Despite himself, Marcus found his mind drawn back to that first contact scenario 3 years ago. The USS Discovery had encountered a Coalition patrol vessel in disputed space, and both sides had been ordered to make peaceful contact. Marcus had been part of the diplomatic security team, supposedly there to observe and protect. He remembered watching the Coalition delegation board their ship, remembered the careful way they moved, the obvious hierarchy in their group dynamics, the almost ritualized nature of their communication. They had been so confident, so assured of their superiority. They spoke to the humans like adults addressing particularly bright children. Then, the hegemony raiders had attacked. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the chaos that followed. The Coalition diplomats had immediately retreated to defensible positions, following doctrine that prioritized survival over mission completion. They had been prepared to write off the encounter as an unfortunate loss and retreat to fight another day. The humans had responded differently. Captain Morrison had looked at the tactical display showing 3 hegemony warships moving to surround them, calculated their odds of survival at approximately 0, and smiled. "Well, gentlemen," she had said, "looks like we get to show our new friends what humans do when the odds are against us." What followed was 43 minutes of the most controlled violence Marcus had ever witnessed. The human crew didn't just fight back against the raiders. They turned the ambush into a masterclass in tactical brutality. They used their ship's life support systems as weapons, vented atmosphere in calculated bursts to confuse enemy sensors, and turned their own escape pods into improvised torpedoes. When the shooting stopped, 3 hegemony warships were debris, and the Discovery was still intact, if barely. The Coalition diplomats had stared at the wreckage in horrified fascination. "How?" their leader had asked. "Your vessel was outgunned, outnumbered, and tactically disadvantaged. By all logical calculations, you should have died in the first exchange." Captain Morrison had looked at the alien with a kind of smile that made enemy admirals wake up in cold sweats. "Logic is for species that can afford to be logical," she had said. "We're from a planet where everything is trying to kill us. We don't fight fair because we've never had the luxury of fighting fair." That was when Marcus had first understood what SSS Thek was talking about. Humans weren't just another species with slightly different biology. They were the product of a world so hostile that basic survival required levels of cunning, aggression, and adaptability that other species couldn't even comprehend. "You're remembering," Thek observed, his voice drawing Marcus back to the present. "I can see it in your biometric readings. You're thinking about the first time you realized what you were, what your species truly represents." Marcus opened his eyes and met the alien's gaze. "If you already know so much, why are you here? Why not just extract what you need and be done with it?" "Because knowledge and understanding are different things," SSS Thek replied. "We know the facts of what happened at Dark Harbor. We know that you infiltrated a hegemony fortress moon that was supposedly impregnable. We know that you eliminated over 200 enemy combatants without raising a single alarm. We know that you extracted 3 high-value targets and destroyed their primary weapons research facility, all while leaving evidence that made it look like an internal power struggle." The alien leaned forward slightly. "What we don't understand is how. Our tactical analysts have run simulations based on the available data. Even accounting for superior human adaptability and aggression, the mission should have been impossible. The variables were too numerous, the margin for error too small, the opposition too well prepared. Maybe your analysts aren't as smart as they think they are," Marcus said. "Or maybe," Thek countered, "humans operate according to principles that we haven't identified yet. Patterns of thought and behavior that don't translate to our models of how intelligent beings should function." Marcus studied the interrogator for a long moment. There was something different about this one, something that set him apart from the other Coalition species Marcus had encountered. Where the Zephyrians were arrogant and the others had been curious or dismissive, SSS Thek seemed genuinely interested in understanding rather than just dominating. "Why does it matter?" Marcus asked finally. "What difference does it make how humans think?" You got the technological advantage. You could glass Earth tomorrow if you wanted to. Could we? SSS Thek's question carried an edge of uncertainty that Marcus found interesting. 3 years ago, we intercepted a human transmission. A simple message broadcast on a frequency we thought your species couldn't access. It said, and I quote, "Phase 1 complete. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2 on schedule." Marcus kept his expression neutral, but internally he felt a surge of satisfaction. They had picked up the transmission. Good. We have since detected 17 similar transmissions from various points in Coalition space, SSS Thek continued. Always from locations where human presence should have been impossible. Always using technology that shouldn't exist. Always referring to phases of some larger operation. The alien's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Tell me, Commander Kane, how many phases are there? For the first time in 17 months, Marcus allowed himself to smile. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Enough. SSS Thek stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I thought you might say that. Which brings us to the real reason for my visit. The interrogator stood and moved closer to the cell barrier, his movements still carrying that unsettling snake-like fluidity. There are factions within the Coalition who believe that humanity should be eliminated before whatever you're planning comes to fruition. They argue that your species represents an existential threat that should be neutralized immediately. And what do you think? Marcus asked. I think, Thek said carefully, that we may have already waited too long. But, more importantly, I think there might be another option. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. The Coalition controls 147 star systems. Our technology is advanced beyond anything your species currently possesses. Our military could reduce Earth to cosmic dust within days of receiving the order. SSS Thek paused. But you're not afraid of that possibility, which suggests that you either have countermeasures we're not aware of, or you believe that destroying Earth would only make the situation worse for us. Or both, Marcus said. Or both, SSS Thek agreed. Which leads me to a proposal. What if, instead of trying to understand how you think, we simply asked you to tell us? Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. You want me to explain human psychology to you? I want you to explain human strategy to me, SSS Thek corrected. Not the tactics of individual missions, but the larger pattern. The phases your people keep referencing. The long-term plan that has them broadcasting confidence while surrounded by enemies. The alien leaned closer to the barrier. I want you to help me understand what humans are really planning, because I suspect that the current approach, treating your species as a simple territorial threat, is catastrophically wrong. Marcus studied the interrogator's expression, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But SSS Thek seemed genuinely curious, genuinely interested in finding an alternative to the path they were currently on. And in exchange? Marcus asked. In exchange, SSS Thek said, I tell you something that might interest you. 3 days ago, we intercepted another human transmission. This one was different. Instead of the usual coded message, it was a single word broadcast in clear text. The alien paused for effect. Reaper. Marcus felt the world shift slightly around him. Someone out there knew he was alive. More importantly, someone was using his call sign as a signal, which meant that whatever was coming next, it was going to be big enough to require the Reaper's personal attention. So, Commander Kane, SSS Thek said softly, shall we discuss the future of human coalition relations? Or shall we continue this dance until one of us destroys the other? Marcus leaned back against the wall of his cell and began to laugh. It wasn't a pleasant sound. The laugh that escaped Marcus Kane was the sound of something breaking inside him. Not in defeat, but in release. For 17 months, he had maintained the careful facade of a captured soldier awaiting rescue or death. But the mention of his call sign being broadcast changed everything. It meant the masquerade was over. You want to understand human strategy? Marcus said, his voice carrying a different tone now, one that made SSS Thek take an involuntary step backward. Let me tell you about the first lesson every human child learns. Never corner something that has nothing left to lose. SSS Thek's scales rippled, and what Marcus had learned was the alien equivalent of unease. Explain. When Coalition scouts found Earth, what did they report back? Marcus asked, settling into a more comfortable position. The neural dampeners in his system were fighting against 17 months of carefully built tolerance, but he could feel his mind beginning to clear. They found a species that had barely achieved interstellar flight, struggling to maintain colonies on a handful of nearby worlds. Primitive, harmless, barely worth monitoring. The interrogator nodded slowly. The initial assessment classified humans as a Level 2 civilization with moderate expansion potential. Level 2, Marcus repeated, savoring the words. Do you know what we were actually doing while your scouts were writing their reports? Before SSS Thek could answer, Marcus continued. We were running the largest military deception operation in galactic history. Every ship your scouts saw was exactly what we wanted them to see. Every colony was precisely as advanced as we wanted it to appear. Every transmission was carefully crafted to reinforce the image of a struggling species taking its first tentative steps into the greater galaxy. Marcus stretched, feeling muscles that had been artificially suppressed beginning to respond properly. What your scouts didn't see were the shipyards hidden in asteroid fields throughout the outer system. They didn't detect the weapons testing facilities on the dark sides of tidally locked worlds. They certainly didn't notice the reconnaissance teams that were already mapping Coalition space, while your superior sensors were focused on our obvious activities. SSS Thek's head tilted in that peculiar way of his species. You're suggesting that first contact was orchestrated by humans? I'm not suggesting anything, Marcus said. I'm telling you, humanity has been preparing for this conversation for over 50 years. We knew that eventually we would encounter a spacefaring civilization with superior technology. We knew that such an encounter would likely involve conflict, and we knew that our only hope of survival would be to control every aspect of that first contact. The alien was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. The mining surveys, the research expeditions, the seemingly random human presence in neutral space. All part of Phase 1, Marcus confirmed. Reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. We needed to understand who you were, how you thought, what your capabilities were. More importantly, we needed to identify your weaknesses. And what weaknesses did you identify? Marcus smiled, and this time there was nothing pleasant about the expression at all. Arrogance, overconfidence, and, most critical of all, your complete inability to conceive of a species that might be fundamentally different from yourselves. He leaned forward slightly, ignoring the warning buzz from his collar. You measure intelligence by technological advancement. You assume that any species capable of space travel will think like you do, value what you value, fight like you fight. It never occurred to you that you might encounter a species that was intelligent in ways you couldn't recognize. Humans are not more intelligent than Coalition species, SSS Thek objected. No, Marcus agreed. We're not. But we're intelligent differently. You evolved on worlds where cooperation and logic were survival traits. We evolved on a world where paranoia and violence were survival traits. You think in terms of efficient solutions and minimal resource expenditure. We think in terms of backup plans and acceptable losses. Marcus gestured around his cell. Case in point, my capture. You see an intelligence windfall, a high-value human asset that you can interrogate for valuable information. You think you're winning because you have me locked up and helpless. Are we not? SSS Thek asked, though uncertainty colored his voice. Tell me, Marcus said conversationally, when was the last time you ran a detailed diagnostic on your ship's systems? The question seemed to come from nowhere, and SSS Thek blinked in confusion. What relevance does that have? Humor me. The interrogator touched a device on his wrist and spoke in his native language. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone of someone requesting information. After a moment, SSS Thek's expression changed. There are irregularities, he said slowly. Minor system fluctuations that began approximately 17 months ago. Right around the time of my capture, Marcus observed. Interesting coincidence. SSS Thek scales were now showing a pattern Marcus had never seen before. Rapid color shifts that suggested deep confusion or alarm. You're suggesting that you somehow sabotaged our ship from inside a maximum security cell? I'm not suggesting anything, Marcus said again. But let me ask you this. What happens when you take a human prisoner? You are interrogated for intelligence value, then either ransomed back to your government or disposed of as appropriate. Wrong, Marcus said flatly. When you take a human prisoner, you invite a virus into your system. Not a computer virus, a human virus. We don't just accept captivity and wait for rescue. We study our captors. We learn their routines, their weaknesses, their blind spots. We turn our prisons into intelligence-gathering operations. Marcus stood slowly, feeling the collar's warning systems track his movement. For 17 months, I've been watching your crew, learning their shift patterns, their emergency procedures, their response times. I've been listening to conversations in languages I wasn't supposed to understand, memorizing layouts of sections I wasn't supposed to see. That's impossible. You've been under constant surveillance. Have I? Marcus asked. Or have I been under surveillance by people who don't understand what they're looking for? You see a human sitting quietly in his cell, and you assume he's resigned to his fate. You don't realize that he's conducting reconnaissance. SSS Thek was definitely alarmed now, his scales shifting rapidly through patterns that spoke of deep unease. Even if that were true, what could you accomplish? You're one being on a ship of 3,000. One being who knows exactly how your ship works, who your key personnel are, and what your response protocols look like. Marcus corrected. One being who has been carefully mapping every vulnerability in your security system for over a year. He paused, letting that sink in. But, more importantly, one being whose capture was supposed to happen. The silence that followed was profound. SSS Thek stared at Marcus with those depthless black eyes, his mind clearly racing through implications. You're claiming that your capture was intentional. I'm claiming that nothing about my presence here has been accidental, Marcus said. The mining survey that brought me into coalition space. The equipment failure that left me stranded. The lucky break that let your patrol find me. All carefully orchestrated. To what end? Marcus settled back against the wall, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Phase 2. Before SSS Thek could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the ship. Not the harsh klaxon of a general alert, but the specific pattern that Marcus had learned meant critical system failure. The lights in his cell flickered once, twice, then stabilized. SSS Thek was speaking rapidly into his wrist communicator, his voice rising with each exchange. Finally, he looked back at Marcus with something approaching fear in his alien features. Someone has accessed our central computer core, he said. Security protocols are being systematically dismantled from the inside. 17 months, Marcus said conversationally. That's how long it takes a properly trained human operative to map a coalition vessel's computer architecture using nothing but observation and deduction. Funny thing about being captured. People stop watching what you're really doing. The alien scales were now showing pure panic patterns. This is impossible. Our systems are quantum encrypted with multiple redundant security layers. No single individual could. You're thinking like a coalition species again, Marcus interrupted. Efficient solutions, minimal resource expenditure. Humans don't break your security. We convince your security to break itself. Another alarm joined the first, this one indicating multiple hull breaches. Marcus could feel the ship's acceleration change as the pilot tried to compensate for what were probably venting atmosphere and disabled maneuvering thrusters. How? SSS Thek demanded. How could you possibly accomplish this from inside a cell? Marcus looked at the interrogator with something approaching pity. Wrong question. You should be asking who. Before SSS Thek could respond, the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in hellish red illumination. And in that moment of darkness and confusion, Marcus heard something that made his heart race with anticipation. Footsteps. Human footsteps moving through the corridor outside his cell with the precise rhythm of military training. You see, Marcus said quietly as the sound of weapons fire began echoing from somewhere deeper in the ship. The thing about capturing the Reaper is that it sends a very specific message to the rest of the pack. The footsteps stopped outside his cell. A voice spoke from the shadows beyond the barrier. A voice speaking perfect English with a slight accent that Marcus recognized. Priority Alpha, asset location confirmed. Beginning extraction. Marcus smiled as SSS Thek scrambled backward, his scales now cycling through every panic pattern in his species repertoire. Phase 2, Interrogator, Marcus said softly. We're not the ones being hunted anymore. The cell barrier exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal, and through the smoke stepped a figure that made Marcus's heart sing with recognition. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, call sign Wraith, stood silhouetted against the emergency lighting like an avenging angel. Hello, Marcus, she said, calmly checking her weapons. Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder. Behind her, Marcus could see at least 2 more figures in advanced stealth armor, their movements carrying the deadly grace that marked them as human special forces. How long have you been aboard? Marcus asked, as Sarah began working on his restraint collar. 3 days, she replied, her fingers dancing over the lock mechanism with practiced efficiency. We've been systematically infiltrating coalition vessels for the past 6 months. This was just the latest on our list. The collar fell away, and Marcus felt his nervous system fully reactivate for the first time in 17 months. The sensation was like lightning flowing through his veins. Status report, he said, flexing his hands as feeling returned to deadened nerves. Phase 2 is proceeding ahead of schedule, Sarah replied, handing him a sidearm and equipment harness. We've compromised 17 coalition vessels and established intelligence networks in 12 major systems. Command wants you back for Phase 3 briefings. Marcus buckled on the harness and checked his weapon with movements that were automatic after years of practice. Timeline: Phase 3 initiates in 72 hours. Behind them, SSS Thek was pressed against the corridor wall, his scales showing patterns that Marcus suspected indicated complete mental shutdown. The interrogator's worldview had just collapsed around him, and he was struggling to process the implications. What about our friend here? Marcus asked, nodding toward the alien. Sarah glanced at SSS Thek with professional assessment. Intelligence asset. Command will want to debrief him. No, Marcus said quietly. He gets to go home. He gets to tell his superiors exactly what he's learned today. Sarah raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. She'd worked with Marcus long enough to trust his instincts about psychological warfare. Marcus walked over where SSS Thek was cowering and knelt down until they were eye level. Remember what I told you about cornered animals? Interrogator. Humanity isn't trapped in here with you. You're trapped out there with us. He stood and turned toward the exit, then paused. Oh, and SSS Thek? When you make your report, be sure to mention that this was just Phase 2. Your people are going to want to think very carefully about what they do next. As the human extraction team moved through the corridors of the Dominion's edge like ghosts in the night, Marcus Kane felt something he hadn't experienced in 17 months. He felt free, and somewhere in the depths of space, the galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The extraction from the Dominion's edge was a masterpiece of coordinated chaos. As Marcus Kane followed Sarah Chun through the ship's darkened corridors, he could hear the symphony of human warfare echoing from multiple decks. Not the brutal, destructive combat that most species employed, but something far more sophisticated. The kind of surgical violence that left enemies confused, demoralized, and convinced that they were facing something beyond their understanding. Status on the primary objectives? Marcus asked as they paused at an intersection, Sarah checking her tactical display. All 17 target vessels have been simultaneously infiltrated, she reported, her voice carrying the calm efficiency that had made her legendary in special operations circles. Ghost Team Alpha has the Coalition command ship. Phantom Squad has their primary research vessel. And Banshee Unit, she smiled grimly. They're currently redecorating the interior of Admiral Kethvar's personal flagship. Marcus nodded approvingly. The simultaneous nature of the operation was crucial. It would prevent the Coalition from adapting their defenses or developing countermeasures. By the time they realized the scope of what was happening, it would already be over. They moved through a junction that Marcus recognized as being 3 levels above the main armory. During his captivity, he had memorized every corridor, every access shaft, every potential route through the ship. The knowledge was paying dividends now. Casualties? He asked. Minimal on our side. 7 wounded, none critical. Coalition losses are. Sarah paused to check her display. Significantly higher, but mostly from panic responses rather than deliberate action. They're shooting at shadows and each other more than they are at us. That was the beauty of human psychological warfare. You didn't need to destroy the enemy's military capability. You just needed to destroy their confidence in that capability. A confused, frightened opponent was infinitely more dangerous to themselves than to you. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a squad of Zephyrian security forces. The aliens were moving with the kind of desperate urgency that indicated they were responding to multiple crises simultaneously. Marcus and Sarah pressed themselves into an alcove as the squad thundered past, their four-armed forms bristling with weapons they were too panicked to use effectively. Poor bastards, Sarah murmured as the aliens disappeared down a side corridor. They have no idea what they're really fighting. Marcus understood what she meant. To the Coalition, this looked like a conventional boarding action, heavily armed soldiers taking control of their vessels through superior firepower and tactics. What they couldn't see was the deeper game being played. Every move the human forces made was being carefully documented by Coalition sensors. Every tactic, every piece of equipment, every response pattern was being recorded for analysis. When this was over, Coalition intelligence would have thousands of hours of combat footage to study, and all of it would tell them exactly what humanity wanted them to believe. They would see human soldiers who were fast, well-trained, and technologically sophisticated, but not impossibly so. They would see tactics that were innovative but comprehensible, equipment that was advanced but not beyond their ability to eventually counter. They would conclude that humanity was a significant threat that could be managed through conventional military responses. What they wouldn't see were the deeper capabilities that humanity was keeping in reserve, the technologies that wouldn't be revealed until they were needed, the strategic doctrines that were so far beyond current galactic thinking that they wouldn't be recognized even if observed directly. Extraction point is just ahead, Sarah said, consulting her display again. Transport should be standing by. As if summoned by her words, a section of the corridor wall suddenly became transparent, revealing itself to be an advanced camouflage field. Beyond it, Marcus could see the sleek lines of a human stealth shuttle, its hull polarized to match the surrounding space. 2 more soldiers in the distinctive black armor of human special forces were securing the docking interface. Commander Kane, one of them said, snapping to attention. Welcome back, sir. Marcus nodded acknowledgement as they boarded the shuttle. The interior was cramped but efficient, designed for rapid insertion and extraction rather than comfort. As the craft detached from the Coalition vessel and began its journey into the darkness between stars, Marcus felt 17 months of tension finally beginning to ease. Briefing packet, Sarah said, handing him a secure data tablet. Everything you missed during your vacation. Marcus scrolled through the information with growing appreciation for the scope of what had been accomplished. The intelligence networks that Sarah had mentioned were just the beginning. In the 6 months since his capture, humanity had systematically infiltrated dozens of Coalition installations, established monitoring posts throughout their territory, and begun the delicate process of psychological conditioning that would make Phase 3 possible. The hegemony situation, he asked, looking up from the tablet. Progressing according to plan. They've increased their aggression toward coalition border worlds by approximately 300%. Our intelligence leaks about coalition weakness have been very well received. Marcus smiled at that. The hegemony were a warrior species that controlled territory adjacent to the coalition. They were also exactly the kind of enemy that humanity needed to keep coalition forces distracted while more subtle operations were conducted. And the Zephyrians are convinced that the hegemony attacks are a response to coalition expansion into disputed space, he said, reading further into the briefing. Commander Vexai has been particularly vocal about the need for increased military spending to counter the threat, Sarah confirmed. He's become our most effective advocate for coalition militarization. The irony was exquisite. By creating external pressure, humanity was forcing the coalition to adopt more aggressive postures that would eventually be used to justify human responses. The galaxy's major powers were being carefully maneuvered into conflict with each other, while humanity remained officially neutral and, therefore, above suspicion. Phase 3 parameters? Marcus asked. Sarah's expression grew serious. Full deployment. Every asset, every capability we've been holding in reserve. Command estimates will have a window of approximately 6 standard months before the coalition adapts their responses. And if they adapt faster than expected, then we proceed directly to Phase 4. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I thought Phase 4 wasn't scheduled for another 5 years. Circumstances change, Sarah replied. The intelligence we've gathered suggests that coalition technology is more advanced than our initial estimates indicated. They have weapons systems that could pose a genuine threat to Earth if they're given time to deploy them. The shuttle's pilot spoke over the intercom. Approaching rendezvous coordinates. Phantom's Edge is decloaking in 3, 2, 1. Space in front of them shimmered like heat distortion, and suddenly, a massive vessel materialized where nothing had been visible moments before. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he looked at the ship that had been his home for 3 years before his capture. The USS Phantom's Edge was the pinnacle of human stealth technology, incorporating advances that wouldn't be revealed to the galaxy for decades. At 800 meters long, she was larger than most coalition cruisers, but her revolutionary hull design made her virtually invisible to conventional sensors. More importantly, she was one of 37 identical vessels that officially didn't exist. Welcome home, Marcus, Sarah said as their shuttle slid into the ship's docking bay. Admiral Morrison is waiting in Conference Room Alpha. The walk through the ship's corridors was like stepping back in time. Everything was exactly as Marcus remembered it. The subtle hum of the gravitic drives, the efficient bustle of crew members going about their duties, the clean lines of human naval architecture. But there was something different in the air, a sense of anticipation that spoke of coming action. Admiral Morrison was waiting in the conference room with her senior staff, and Marcus felt a familiar surge of respect as he entered. Janet Morrison was humanity's finest naval commander, a woman who had never lost a battle and never backed down from a challenge. She was also the architect of the multi-phase plan that was reshaping the balance of power in the galaxy. Marcus, she said, rising from her chair, good to have you back. I trust your stay with the Coalition was educational. Very much so, Marcus replied, taking his seat at the conference table. They're more capable than our initial assessment suggested, but also more predictable. Their command structure is rigid, their tactical doctrine is conservative, and they have absolutely no conception of asymmetric warfare. Perfect, Morrison said with satisfaction. Which brings us to Phase 3. She activated the room's holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of Coalition space. In 72 hours, we begin simultaneous operations in 47 different systems. The objectives are twofold: demonstrate human capabilities to a degree that cannot be ignored, and create the political pressure necessary for Phase 4 authorization. Marcus studied the display, noting the careful selection of targets. Military installations, research facilities, and communication hubs, all chosen to inflict maximum psychological impact, while minimizing actual casualties. Rules of engagement? He asked. Minimum necessary force. Morrison replied. We're not trying to destroy the coalition. We're trying to educate them. They need to understand that continued conflict with humanity will be prohibitively expensive, but they also need to believe that negotiation remains possible. And if they don't get the message? Morrison's expression hardened. Then, we show them what happens when you corner a predator species with nothing left to lose. The briefing continued for another hour, covering operational details, contingency plans, and coordination protocols. By the time it ended, Marcus had a clear picture of what humanity was attempting and why it was necessary. The galaxy was on the verge of a fundamental shift in power dynamics. The Coalition had maintained peace through technological superiority for over 2 centuries, but that peace was beginning to fracture as younger species developed their own capabilities. War was coming whether humanity intervened or not. The question was whether it would be a war that humanity could control or one that could eventually threaten Earth itself. One more thing, Morrison said as the meeting concluded. Your time in Coalition custody wasn't wasted. The intelligence you gathered has been invaluable, but more importantly, your presence there sent a message. They know now that we can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime we choose. Marcus nodded. They're scared. Good, Morrison replied. Fear makes them predictable, and predictable enemies are the easiest kind to defeat. As Marcus left the conference room and headed toward his quarters, he reflected on the journey that had brought humanity to this point. 3 years ago, they had been an unknown species on the galactic periphery. Now, they were positioned to become the dominant power in their local sector. The transformation had required sacrifice, patience, and a willingness to play a longer game than any other species in the galaxy was capable of conceiving. But it was working. In 72 hours, Phase 3 would begin. The galaxy would finally see what humanity was truly capable of. And once that particular cat was out of the bag, nothing would ever be the same again. Marcus entered his quarters and found a package waiting on his desk, his personal effects, returned from Coalition custody. Among them was a small wooden carving his sister had made for him before his last deployment, a reminder of home and of what he was fighting to protect. He picked up the carving and smiled. The Coalition thought they understood humans now. They thought they had learned their capabilities and limitations. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. 72 hours passed like the calm before a hurricane. Marcus Kane used the time to reacclimate himself to freedom, catching up on months of intelligence reports and reconnecting with his team. But beneath the surface preparations, he could feel the tension building throughout the ship. Phase 3 wasn't just another operation. It was humanity's debut on the galactic stage, and everyone knew that the performance had to be perfect. At 0800 hours ship time, Admiral Morrison's voice echoed through the Phantom's Aegis communication systems. All hands, this is the Admiral. Phase 3 is now active. Execute Operation Reckoning. Marcus was on the bridge when the first reports began coming in. Across 47 star systems, human forces were simultaneously striking targets that had been considered absolutely secure. The coordination was flawless, the timing precise to the microsecond. Coalition Command at Zirian Prime has gone dark, reported the communications officer. Complete communications blackout, no distress signals. Zephyrian Research Facility at Kepler, 442 reporting massive system failures, added another technician. They're requesting immediate assistance. Hegemony Border Fortress at Tau Ceti is, wait, this can't be right. They're reporting that their entire defense grid is playing human classical music instead of tactical data. Marcus allowed himself a smile at that last report. Psychological warfare at its finest. Demonstrate your capabilities while simultaneously showing that you could have done much worse. Status on primary objectives? Admiral Morrison asked from the captain's chair. All targets acquired, the tactical officer responded. Penetration teams report successful infiltration of target facilities. Intelligence gathering proceeding on schedule. The beauty of Phase 3 wasn't in its destructive capacity, but in its precision. Human forces weren't trying to cripple coalition infrastructure. They were proving that they could reach any target they chose, anytime they chose. The message was unmistakable. Nowhere in coalition space was truly safe. Admiral, the communications officer called out, "We're receiving a priority transmission from Coalition Central Command. They're requesting immediate communication with whoever is responsible for these attacks." Morrison nodded to Marcus. "You're on, Commander. Time to collect the fruits of your captivity." Marcus moved to the communication station and activated the long-range transmitter. The main display flickered to life, showing the emergency command center aboard the Coalition's capital ship. He recognized several faces from intelligence files, but his attention focused on one figure in particular. Interrogator Sisisthek stood at the edge of the group, his scales displaying patterns of deep unease. When he saw Marcus on the display, those patterns shifted to something that looked suspiciously like relief. "Coalition Command," Marcus said formally. "This is Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kane of the United Earth Navy. I understand you wanted to speak with someone in authority." The Coalition officers exchanged glances, clearly struggling to process the implications of what they were seeing. Finally, Admiral HFY stepped forward. The Zephyrian skin was cycling through deep reds and blacks, colors Marcus now knew indicated extreme agitation. "Commander Kane," HFY said, his dual-tone voice carrying barely controlled anger. "Your forces have just attacked 47 secure installations across Coalition space. This is an act of war." "Is it?" Marcus replied mildly. "I was under the impression that acts of war involve the deliberate destruction of enemy assets and loss of life. Tell me, Admiral, how many Coalition personnel have been killed in these operations?" The silence that followed was telling. After a moment, HFY's aide whispered something in his ear. "None," the Admiral admitted reluctantly. "But you have violated our sovereignty, compromised our security, and proven a point," Marcus interrupted. "For the past 3 years, the Coalition has treated humanity as a minor nuisance. You've captured our people, violated our territory, and consistently assumed that you could do so without consequences because we lack the capability to respond effectively." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes boring into the camera. "Today's operations were designed to correct that misconception. You're threatening the entire Coalition," another officer interjected, a member of a species Marcus didn't recognize, with crystalline skin that reflected the emergency lighting. "Actually," Marcus said calmly, "we're offering the Coalition an opportunity to reconsider its position on humanity. You see, what happened today was just a demonstration. A proof of concept, if you will." He gestured to something off camera, and the display split to show tactical readouts from across Coalition space. Real-time data streams showing the status of the 47 targeted facilities, all of which were reporting the same thing. Complete system compromise with no permanent damage. "Every installation we accessed today could have been destroyed instead of infiltrated," Marcus continued. "Every defense grid we bypassed could have been turned against your own forces. Every communication network we penetrated could have been used to spread disinformation or chaos." The Coalition officers were staring at the data with growing horror, realizing the implications of what they were seeing. "What do you want?" HFY asked finally. "What we've always wanted," Marcus replied. "Recognition, respect, and the understanding that humanity is not some primitive species that can be bullied into submission." He paused, letting that sink in. "We propose a formal summit. Representatives from humanity and the Coalition meeting on neutral ground to discuss the future of our relationship. Because I promise you, Admiral, you do not want to see what Phase 4 looks like." Before HFY could respond, SSS Thek stepped forward. "Commander Kane, may I ask a question?" "Of course, Interrogator. During your captivity, you spoke of phases. How many phases are there in humanity's plan?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in the conversation, it was genuinely pleasant. "7, SSS Thek. We're currently at Phase 3. Would you like me to describe what the remaining phases entail? The alien scales cycled through several colors before settling on a mottled pattern that Marcus suspected indicated confusion mixed with terror. That won't be necessary, Sisithek said quietly. I thought you might say that, Marcus replied. Admiral Kethvar, you have 72 hours to respond to our proposal for a summit. If we don't receive a positive response by then, Phase 4 automatically initiates. And if we refuse entirely, the crystalline officer demanded. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then, you'll discover why the galaxy has so few apex predator species. They tend to either evolve into something more cooperative, or they tend to disappear. The communication link went dead, leaving the Coalition Command Center in stunned silence. On the bridge of the Phantom's edge, Admiral Morrison nodded approvingly. Nicely done. Think they'll accept the summit proposal. They'll accept, Marcus said confidently. They have to, because the alternative is admitting that they're not actually the dominant power in this region of space anymore. Morrison activated the ship's general communications. All stations, this is the Admiral. Phase 3 objectives have been completed successfully. All teams are to extract from target zones and return to designated rally points. Phase 4 authorization is on standby, pending Coalition response. As the bridge crew began coordinating the withdrawal of human forces from Coalition space, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years of careful planning, patient intelligence gathering, and strategic positioning, all culminating in a single moment when humanity stepped out of the shadows and announced its presence to the galaxy. Marcus, Admiral Morrison said quietly, joining him at the observation window, where he was watching Coalition patrol ships scrambling to respond to threats that were already gone. How do you think this ends? With humanity in control of its own destiny, he replied without hesitation. The Coalition will accept the summit because they have no choice. The negotiations will be tense, but they'll result in a treaty that recognizes human sovereignty and establishes mutual defense agreements. And if they don't, Marcus turned from the window, his expression serious. Then we proceed through phases 4, 5, 6, and 7 until they do. Humanity didn't survive on a death world for 200,000 years by backing down from superior opponents. We survived by being more dangerous than anything that threatened us. Morrison nodded slowly. The intelligence estimates suggest that full implementation of Phase 7 would result in the complete reorganization of galactic civilization. That's correct. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Marcus considered the question carefully. Admiral, 3 days ago, I was sitting in a Coalition prison cell, pretending to be a helpless captive while actually conducting the largest intelligence operation in human history. Yesterday, I was extracted by a team that had infiltrated 17 enemy vessels simultaneously. Today, I forced the galaxy's dominant civilization to request negotiations instead of demanding surrender. He gestured toward the stars beyond the window. I think humanity is ready for whatever level of responsibility is required. 6 hours later, the Coalition's response arrived. A formal acceptance of the summit proposal, along with coordinates for a neutral meeting station in unclaimed space. The message was signed by the Coalition High Council, marking the first time in their history that they had agreed to negotiate with a species they considered inferior. Marcus read the message with satisfaction, then began preparing for the next phase of humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage. The summit would be crucial, but it was just another step in a much larger plan. Somewhere in the depths of space, 36 other vessels identical to the Phantom's Edge were receiving similar messages and making similar preparations. The shadow fleet that humanity had spent decades constructing was finally ready to step into the light. And in a small wooden carving on Marcus Kane's desk, a reminder of Earth and home waited patiently for the day when no human would ever again have to face the galaxy alone. The age of human space power had begun. But as Marcus reviewed the intelligence reports from the day's operations, he noticed something interesting. Several coalition facilities had reported detecting what they described as impossible energy signatures during the infiltrations. Readings that suggested technology far beyond what humanity had officially demonstrated. Marcus smiled and made a note to include those reports in his Phase 4 briefings. The coalition thought they had seen humanity's full capabilities today. They were about to learn how wrong they were. After all, you didn't survive on a death world by showing all your weapons to potential threats. You survived by always keeping something nastier in reserve. And humanity had been very good at surviving for a very long time. In the darkness between stars, the Phantom's Edge set course for the summit coordinates, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of an entire species. Behind them, 46 other ships that didn't officially exist prepared to make their own journeys to their own destinations. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you tried to cage the apex predator. It didn't get captured. It got angry. And angry humans were the most dangerous force in the known universe.